Narrator. Have you ever felt the crushing, suffocating weight of 1,000 eyes waiting for you to shatter? Imagine the exact moment your entire world is brutally ripped away by the one person destiny promised would protect you. The breath violently leaves your lungs, the silence in the magnificent room becomes deafening, and every single person around you is holding their breath, waiting for you to fall to your knees and beg. What would you do? Most would break, most would scream. But what if, in that exact split second of absolute, terrifying destruction, you discovered the most devastating psychological weapon known to mankind? Wolf King Stories warmly welcomes you to a journey where we do not merely read tales to pass the time. We violently tear open the darkest, most profound corners of the human psyche. If you are captivated by narratives that obliterate toxic tropes and rebuild raw, unapologetic power, please hit that subscribe button right now. Your subscription is the vital fuel that gives us the motivation to keep unearthing these psychological masterpieces for you in the future. I am so incredibly exhausted by the recycled, pathetic garbage that modern literature and media have force-fed us for decades. You know the exact cliché I am talking about. A woman, the perfect, traditional, compliant victim, is discarded by the powerful man she loves. And what does she do? She collapses, she wails. She claws at his boots, shredding her own dignity into pathetic little ribbons just to hold on to a man who has already decided she is worthless. For generations, our pop culture has unknowingly championed a highly toxic ideology that a woman's pain must be theatrical, and that her intrinsic value evaporates into thin air the second a man turns his back on her. We are trapped in an agonizingly boring loop of female protagonists drowning in self-pity, desperately waiting for a miracle or the belated, hollow regret of their abuser. But the scenario we are diving into today is a resounding, magnificent slap to the face of that wretched prejudice. Narrator. Step with me into the blinding, suffocating opulence of the Great Hall on the day of the supreme coronation. The air is impossibly thick, choking with ambition, political greed, and the predatory gaze of the kingdom's elite. Standing on the highest pedestal is Alpha King Ulric, the very epitome of absolute dominance, vanity, and peak societal triumph. His voice booms, echoing off the ancient marble walls. But instead of pledging his eternal soul to Thea, his fated mate bound by the sacred laws of their universe, Ulric executes an act of calculated, cold-blooded butchery. He casts her aside in front of the entire realm. His reasoning? Filthy, desperate political calculation. He craves a queen with a monstrously powerful family lineage, a living, breathing stepping stone for his own ascension, rather than a destiny-bound partner. Ulric. I, Alpha King Ulric, publicly reject you, Thea, as my fated mate. You bring no lineage, no power, and no value to my throne. Leave this hall, and never return. Narrator. When those agonizing words of rejection leave his lips, what does Ulric expect? What do the thousands of onlookers salivate for? They are starving for her ruin. They want the tears. They want the humiliating spectacle of a broken woman groveling for her life. But what happens next is arguably the most brilliant psychological pivot in the history of this entire genre. The most profound moment, the very anchor of this narrative's psychological depth, is captured in a devastatingly heavy sentence. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just stood there. Thea's silence in that monumental second is not the paralysis of a helpless victim stripped of her voice. It is the most ruthless, spectacular psychological counterattack I have ever witnessed. In the realm of psychology, power-hungry narcissists like Ulric run on a ravenous engine. They desperately require the narcissistic supply of seeing their victims bleed. Your agony validates their grandiosity. Thea's tears would have been the ultimate fuel to stroke his inflated ego. By denying him the privilege of witnessing her breakdown, Thea violently strips him of his ultimate weapon. By doing absolutely nothing, she screams a deafening, wordless message. Thea, you are simply not worthy of breaking me. Narrator. Behavioral psychology dictates that facing public humiliation, humans instinctively fight or flee. Thea chooses a terrifying third option, a stoic, immovable presence. She steps entirely out of the victim role, cloaking herself in supreme autonomy, leaving behind a king who thought he had won, only to realize he had just been utterly stripped of his power over her emotions. Narrator. Yet, the true brilliance of this scene does not merely lie in Thea's stoicism, but in the immediate, chilling unraveling of the man who thought he had just conquered the world. You see, when an abuser drops the guillotine, they are entirely dependent on the victim's scream to validate their executioner status. Alpha King Ulric stands on that marble pedestal, his chest puffed with the intoxicating fumes of his own grandiosity, waiting for the echo of her devastation to cement his authority. But Thea gives him absolutely nothing. In that suffocating silence, the atmospheric pressure of the great hall violently shifts. The thousands of onlookers who had just been salivating for a theatrical tragedy suddenly find themselves staring at a king who looks less like a conquering god and more like a petulant, cruel boy who has just swung a sword at the ocean. This is what psychologists refer to as a profound narcissistic injury. By withholding her grief, Thea inadvertently holds up a massive, inescapable mirror to Ulric's inadequacy. He threw his heaviest psychological blow, and she did not even bleed. I watch this scene, and I am utterly mesmerized by the subtle twitch in his jaw, the sudden, frantic darting of his eyes as the realization sets in. He has successfully severed their sacred bond, yet, paradoxically, he has never looked weaker. The political elites in the room, those predatory vultures who respect only absolute dominance, can sense this microscopic fracture in his aura. Ulric's carefully calculated strategy to appear invincible by discarding his fated mate backfires in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. He realizes, in a sickening rush of adrenaline, that he cannot control her. And to a man whose entire identity is built on the subjugation of others, a woman who refuses to be broken by his hand is a terrifying anomaly. He wanted to discard a liability, but instead, he has birthed an enigma, a walking testament to his own inability to completely dominate his realm. Narrator. While Ulric was left to privately choke on the ashes of his hollow victory, Thea embarked on a solitary, agonizing journey that entirely redefines the very essence of female resilience in modern fantasy. I need to be extraordinarily clear here. Thea is not an unfeeling robot, and this narrative does not do her the disservice of pretending that betrayal doesn't burn like acid in her veins. When she finally steps out of that suffocating great hall and into the blinding cold of the wilderness, the adrenaline fades, and the sheer, brutal gravity of the rejection crashes down on her. The sacred bond, a metaphysical tether meant to anchor her soul, has been violently amputated. But this is exactly where the story elevates itself from a mere revenge fantasy into a staggering psychological masterpiece. Instead of weaponizing her pain to fuel a frantic, desperate crusade to win him back, or plunging into a self-destructive spiral of depression, Thea chooses the excruciating path of radical acceptance. She sits alone in the darkness of her exile and allows the grief to completely wash over her, processing the trauma in the sacred privacy of her own company. She realizes that her worth was never inherently tied to the crown, nor was it validated by the man who wore it. In the quiet, unseen moments of her isolation, Thea systematically deconstructs the toxic ideology she had been raised in, the lie that a female wolf without her fated alpha is a fundamentally broken creature. I am deeply moved by the author's decision to focus on the tedious, unglamorous mechanics of her healing. We witness her relearning how to breathe, how to hunt, how to simply exist without the phantom weight of a man's expectations pressing down on her spine. She isn't building an army to storm his gates, she is building an impenetrable fortress within her own mind. Thea transforms her shattering trauma from a definitive endpoint into a brutal, necessary crucible, emerging not as a bitter victim seeking vengeance, but as a sovereign entity who has entirely reclaimed the deed to her own soul. Narrator. As Thea forged her shattered spirit into an unbreakable weapon of self-love, the lavish kingdom she left behind slowly morphed into a gilded, suffocating cage of paranoia and regret for the Alpha King. It is a fundamental law of the universe that whenever you sacrifice a piece of your soul for earthly power, the power you gain will eventually turn into poison. Ulric got exactly what he thought he wanted, a queen with an impeccable, terrifying bloodline, and a political alliance that secured his borders. But a kingdom built on the rotting foundation of a severed fate cannot stand forever. I find it deeply fascinating, almost tragically poetic, to watch the slow, agonizing psychological decay of a man who thought he had outsmarted destiny. His new queen is a mirror image of his own narcissism, cold, calculating, and fundamentally devoid of the primal, grounding warmth that a true fated bond provides. The nights in the palace grow perpetually freezing. The political elites, whom he tried so desperately to impress by rejecting Thea, are now plotting behind his back, sensing the spiritual void that his arrogance has created. The kingdom's strength wanes, crops fail, and the very air in the capital feels stagnant, reflecting the corrupted soul of its ruler. And it is in the dead of these silent, miserable nights that the memory of Thea's absolute silence begins to haunt him like a relentless poltergeist. Ulric begins to obsess over the woman he threw away. He sends spies to the outer territories, secretly hoping they will bring back tales of her demise, proof that she could not survive without his benevolence. When the Whispers finally return to the throne room, they do not speak of a wretched, starving beggar. They speak of a radiant, formidable force of nature, leading her own life in the untamed wilds. The psychological agony of realizing that your ultimate rejection was actually the catalyst for your victim's supreme liberation is a torment far worse than death. Narrator. Ultimately, the universe possesses a dark, poetic justice, revealing that the absolute pinnacle of power is not the ability to destroy your abusers, but the psychological capacity to render them entirely irrelevant. The climax of this narrative does not arrive in a grand, bloody battlefield, nor does it feature a dramatic, tear-soaked apology where Ulric begs on his knees while Thea brandishes a sword at his throat. That would be too easy, too cliché. The true climax occurs years later, a fleeting, accidental encounter in a neutral territory. Ulric, worn down by the spiritual rot of his own choices, locks eyes with the woman he shattered. He is desperate for a reaction, anger, hatred, sorrow, anything to prove that he still holds a permanent residence in her mind. He steps forward, his chest tight with a pathetic, belated apology dying on his lips. Ulric. Thea, please. I was blind. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Narrator. And how does our protagonist respond? She looks at him. Her eyes, once brimming with unconditional devotion, are entirely empty of both malice and affection. She looks at the supreme Alpha King of the realm with the exact same mild, passing curiosity one might afford a stranger on the street, and then, she simply turns and walks away, resuming a conversation with a companion. It is the absolute, devastating weapon of pure indifference. Hate implies that you still care. Indifference proves that they no longer exist in your reality. I am left entirely speechless by this magnificent conclusion. It forces every single one of us to look inward and ask ourselves, why do we waste our precious energy plotting revenge against those who broke us, when the ultimate victory is outgrowing them completely? Thea's story is a monumental triumph of the human spirit, a definitive guide on how to survive the darkest emotional betrayals and emerge untouchable. If this profound exploration of psychological rebirth has resonated with the darkest, most resilient parts of your soul, do not forget to subscribe to Wolf King Stories. We will continue to dissect, analyze, and bring you the most powerful narratives that challenge everything you thought you knew about love, power, and survival. The saga of Alpha King Ulric and Thea transcends the conventional boundaries of fantasy romance, evolving into a profound psychological masterclass on trauma, narcissism, and ultimate liberation. At its core, this narrative dismantles the deeply ingrained trope that betrayal must be answered with either tragic despair or violent vengeance. Instead, it offers a revolutionary paradigm. True power is forged in the silent, agonizing crucible of radical acceptance. When Ulric severed their fated bond, He expected to cement his dominance, but his public cruelty merely exposed his fragile, ego-driven inadequacies. As his gilded kingdom slowly succumbed to spiritual rot and political paranoia, Thea embarked on a grueling, solitary journey to rebuild her identity entirely independent of the crown and his validation. She did not seek to destroy her abuser, she simply outgrew him. The narrative's ultimate triumph lies not in a bloody battlefield, but in the devastating art of pure indifference. By the time their paths cross again, Ulric is haunted by the phantom of his own arrogance, desperately craving even a sliver of her emotional energy. Yet, Thea offers him nothing but the mild curiosity reserved for a passing stranger. Her journey beautifully illustrates that surviving a profound betrayal is not about proving your worth to the person who broke you, but about completely reclaiming the deed to your own soul. Thea's stoicism and eventual indifference serve as a monumental testament to the indomitable resilience of the human spirit, proving that the absolute pinnacle of victory over abuse is rendering the abuser entirely irrelevant to your reality. The ultimate victory over betrayal and narcissistic abuse is never revenge, it is radical acceptance and absolute indifference. Harboring hate or seeking retaliation merely keeps you tethered to the person who hurt you, proving they still control your emotional state. True liberation is achieved only when you detach your inherent self-worth from the validation of those who broke you, stripping them of their power and rendering their existence entirely irrelevant to your inner peace. When faced with severe rejection, a toxic relationship, or a deep betrayal, resist the instinct to retaliate, prove your worth, or beg for closure from the person who caused your pain. Instead, pivot your energy entirely inward. Allow yourself to grieve the loss privately, process the trauma without judgment, and embrace the unglamorous, everyday mechanics of healing. Focus on rebuilding your own life, nurture your physical well-being, invest in your personal passions, and establish impenetrable boundaries. By redirecting your energy toward your own independent growth, you naturally outgrow the people and environments that once diminished you, transforming your trauma into a fortress of self-love. Do you believe that pure indifference is a more powerful response to betrayal than seeking revenge? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comment section below, so our community can learn and draw strength from your perspective. If this deep dive into psychological rebirth and resilience resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel. Your support gives us the motivation to continue analyzing and bringing you the most powerful stories that challenge everything we know about love, power, and survival.